I was calmly driving on a road trip with my wife, Jessica, and our 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah. It was one of those picture-perfect days, the kind that almost fools you into believing life is flawless. The girls were laughing in the back seat, some cheesy pop song blaring from the radio. Jessica sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, her lips pursed in that way I used to find endearing. Suddenly, a car screeched into our lane, cutting me off so sharply I had to slam the brakes. "What the hell?" I muttered, gripping the wheel as the car skidded to a stop on the gravel shoulder. Before I could process what had just happened, a man stormed out of the other car. He looked furious, red-faced, his fists clenched, and his movements jerky, like a puppet on frayed strings. Then I saw the gun. "Everybody out," he screamed, pointing the weapon at me, his voice cracking with rage. "Out of the car, now." Emily let out a small gasp, her wide blue eyes darting from me to the man outside. Sarah, always the braver one, muttered, "Dad, what's going on?" I didn't have an answer because my mind was blank. Except for one thing, Jessica had gone pale. Her hands trembled, and she looked like she might faint right there in the passenger seat. The man banged on my window with the butt of the gun, snapping me back to reality. "I set out," he roared, spit flying as he shouted. I opened the door, my legs moving as if they belonged to someone else. The girls stayed frozen in the back seat, clutching each other. Jessica hesitated but eventually stepped out, her movements slow and mechanical. The man didn't even glance at me. His eyes were fixed on her, his face twisted with fury and betrayal. "You," he shouted, pointing the gun at Jessica now. "You lying, cheating tramp. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" He took a step closer, his hand shaking as he waved the gun. Jessica finally spoke, her voice breaking. "Matt, please, not here. Not in front of the kids. Kids. Kids." My chest tightened as her words sank in. She knew him. She wasn't scared of him the way I was. Her fear wasn't for her life, it was for the scene he was about to cause. And suddenly, all those little oddities I'd ignored over the past few months, the late nights, the guarded phone, the distant stares, came crashing down on me like a landslide. "You've been cheating on me?" The words came out before I could stop them, my voice cracking with disbelief. My daughters were still in the car, and I hated myself for saying it out loud, but I couldn't hold it in. Jessica shot me a look, a cold, hard glare that sliced right through me. "Daniel, this isn't the time," she snapped, as if I'd asked her to pass the salt at dinner. The man, Matt, apparently, didn't care about timing either. "You don't get to hide anymore, Jessica," he yelled. "Tell him the truth. Tell your perfect little husband what you've been doing behind his back." The girls were crying now, their muffled sobs leaking through the cracked windows. I wanted to run to them, to tell them everything would be okay, but I was rooted to the spot. My whole world was spinning, unraveling strand by strand. Jessica folded her arms and sighed, exasperated, like this was some petty argument over laundry. "Matt, put the gun away. You're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous? Ridiculous?" His voice went up an octave, and his grip on the gun tightened. "I gave up everything for you, Jess. My marriage, my reputation, everything. And now you're sitting here like I'm the crazy one?" I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me anymore. The Jessica I married, the mother of my children, wouldn't have been capable of this. Yet here she was, her lies unraveling as this man, a complete stranger to me, stood in the middle of the road holding a gun. "Jessica," my voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Is it true? Are you cheating on me with this guy?" She hesitated. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but before I could react, Matt threw his head back and laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You didn't even tell him, did you? God, you're unbelievable. Shut up, Matt. Jessica hissed, her calm facade slipping. For the first time, I saw something other than indifference in her eyes. Fear. Not for me, not for our daughters. She was scared for herself. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my priority was the girls. I turned back to the car, opening the door and crouching down to meet their tear-streaked faces. It's okay, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Everything's going to be okay. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anything would ever be okay again. The road stretched out behind us, empty and desolate, as if the world itself had decided to leave us alone for this nightmare. My mind raced, heart pounding with the kind of primal instinct that screams at you to protect your family. But how do you protect them from betrayal that's already inside your home? Matt was still pacing, the gun swinging carelessly in his hand, his anger palpable. Jessica stood in front of him like a statue, cold, rigid, and indifferent, except for the faint tremor in her clenched fists. She still hadn't said a word to me. No apology, no explanation. Just silence and avoidance, as if her betrayal didn't deserve acknowledgement. Jessica, get in the car, I finally said, my voice low but firm. The girls were crying harder now, their small bodies trembling in the back seat. Every tear was a knife to my chest. No, Matt growled, stepping closer to me. She's not going anywhere with you. I've had it with her lies. She's coming with me. Over my dead body, I shot back, the word surprising even myself. I wasn't the confrontational type, but something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about protecting my daughters from the chaos Jessica had unleashed on us. Matt's lip curled into a sneer, but Jessica intervened before he could say anything. Matt, stop it, she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. You're making this worse. Put the gun down. Making it worse, he spat, turning to her. You're the one who dragged me into this mess. You're the one who lied to both of us. How many more people are you going to ruin before you're satisfied? I glanced at her, hoping, praying, that she'd deny it, that she'd say he was crazy or delusional. But she just stood there, silent. Her silence was a confession. Jessica, I said, my voice trembling. What's going on? How long has this been happening? She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and calculating, like she was deciding whether I even deserved the truth. Daniel, not now, she said with a sigh, as if I were inconveniencing her by asking. Not now? I snapped, my voice rising. You brought this lunatic into our lives, and you're telling me not now? I didn't bring him here, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. I don't control what Matt does. This isn't my fault. Her fault? How could she even say that? The sheer audacity of her words sent a wave of anger crashing over me. But before I could respond, Matt laughed again, that same bitter, hollow laugh. You're unbelievable, he said, shaking his head. Still playing the victim, huh? You're a piece of work, Jessica. You told me he was boring, that he didn't love you, that he was some spineless loser who didn't appreciate you. He turned to me, his eyes filled with pity. She's been trash-talking you for months, man. Making you out to be the bad guy while she sneaks around with me. And I was stupid enough to believe her. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. Every word was a dagger, each one driving deeper than the last. Is that true? I asked Jessica, my voice barely above a whisper. She rolled her eyes, exasperated. Oh, come on, Daniel. You're seriously going to take his word for it? He's crazy. She gestured toward Matt, who was still holding the gun, though his grip had loosened slightly. You don't know him like I do. He's unstable. Unstable? Matt barked, stepping closer to her. I'm unstable because I believed in you. Because I thought you actually cared about me. He waved the gun in the air, and I flinched, shielding my face instinctively. "Matt, please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My daughters are in the car. They don't need to see this. Just, let's handle this like adults." He looked at me, his expression softening slightly. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. But then Jessica opened her mouth again. "Oh, don't be such a saint, Daniel," she snapped. "You're not perfect either, so stop acting like this is some great betrayal." "Perfect?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I've done everything for you, Jessica. I've worked my ass off to give you and the girls a good life. And this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with this guy?" I gestured to Matt, who now looked more humiliated than angry. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have had to," she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty road. The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughters gasped in the back seat, and Emily whispered, "Daddy, is Mommy leaving?" Her tiny voice broke me in ways I didn't know I could break. Jessica didn't even flinch. She turned to Matt, her hands on her hips, and said, "Are you happy now? You've humiliated me in front of my family. Can you just leave?" "Leave?" Matt's voice cracked. "You're not getting off that easy. I'm done being your dirty little secret." And with that, he raised the gun, pointing it directly at her. My heart stopped, the world narrowing to that single moment. "Matt!" I shouted, stepping between them instinctively. "Put it down. Please. Let's just talk." But Jessica wasn't scared. She crossed her arms and smirked, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't have the guts to do it. You're all talk, Matt. Just like always." His hand shook, his face twisted with anguish, and for the first time, I saw the broken man behind the rage. But the gun didn't lower, and I knew we were one wrong word away from disaster. "Matt, listen to me," I said, my voice trembling as I stood between him and Jessica. My body was tense, ready to react to anything. "You don't have to do this. Think about what you're doing. My kids are watching, please, just put the gun down." His eyes flicked to the car where Emily and Sarah were huddled together, their tear-streaked faces pressed against the window. Something shifted in his expression, guilt, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The gun didn't waver. "She ruined me," Matt said, his voice cracking. "I left my wife for her. My wife, my kids, everything. All because I thought she loved me. And now she acts like I'm nothing. Like I'm some mistake she regrets." "She is a mistake," Jessica snapped, her arms still crossed, her face a mask of contempt. "You were a distraction, Matt. That's all you ever were." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even with a gun pointed at her, Jessica couldn't show an ounce of remorse. Her words were like gasoline on a fire, and I could see Matt unraveling in front of me. His grip on the gun tightened, his whole body trembling with rage. "Shut up," he screamed, his voice echoing across the empty road. "Just shut up. Matt, don't," I said, my hands raised as I took a cautious step forward. "Don't let her drag you down any further. She's not worth it. Look at what she's already done to both of us. Don't let her take more." For a moment, it seemed like he was listening. His breathing slowed, and the gun lowered slightly. But then Jessica laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that cut through the tension like a blade. "Of course, you'd team up against me," she sneered. "Two pathetic men blaming me for your failures. Grow up, both of you." "Jessica, stop," I snapped, whipping around to face her. "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you not see what's happening here? Do you even care?" "Care?" she scoffed. "Why should I care? You think I'm scared of him? Please. Matt's not going to do anything. He never follows through. Matt let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You think I won't? You think I won't do something this time? The gun was up again, aimed at Jessica's chest. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Matt, no! I shouted, stepping in front of Jessica. You don't want to do this. Think about your kids, man. Think about the life you still have. Don't let her destroy you any more than she already has. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding. But then Jessica's voice cut through again. You're pathetic, Matt, she said, her tone icy and detached. Both of you are. Do it if you have the guts. Or better yet, just get in your car and leave. I'm done with you. Jessica, shut up. I roared, my voice echoing across the road. My anger was boiling over, but not just at her. At myself, for not seeing the signs. At Matt, for dragging my daughters into this. At the whole mess that my life had become. Matt's hand was shaking so badly now that I was afraid the gun might go off by accident. I needed to end this before someone got hurt. Matt, I said, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. Look at me. This isn't who you are. Don't let her push you into doing something you can't take back. She's not worth it. For a long moment, he didn't move. The tension was unbearable, the kind that makes every second feel like an eternity. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a shaky breath, as if all the fight had drained out of him. She's not worth it, he repeated, almost to himself. She's not worth it. I took a step forward, my hand still raised. That's it, Matt. Just put the gun down. Let's walk away from this. He nodded, his face crumpling as tears streamed down his cheeks. He looked so broken, so utterly defeated, that for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. But before he could hand me the gun, Jessica spoke again. Oh, for God's sake, Matt. Stop crying like a baby and get out of here. You're embarrassing yourself. I turned to her, my jaw tightening. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I snapped. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? She rolled her eyes. Spare me the lecture, Daniel. You're no saint either. Don't act like this is all my fault. Her words hit me like a slap. Even now, with everything falling apart around us, she couldn't admit what she'd done. She couldn't take responsibility for any of it. Matt let out a bitter laugh, wiping his face with his free hand. You're right, Daniel, he said, his voice hollow. She's not worth it. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. He tossed the gun into the passenger seat and slammed the door before driving off, tires screeching as he disappeared down the road. I stood there, staring after him, my mind reeling. Jessica didn't say a word. She just crossed her arms and waited, as if she expected me to get back in the car and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The silence that followed Matt's departure was deafening. The road was empty now, save for our car and the shattered remnants of my life. Jessica stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her face set in a mask of indifference. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, felt like a stranger. The girls were still in the car, their sobs muffled but audible through the cracked windows. My heart ached for them. They were too young to understand the full scope of what had just happened, but they had seen enough to know their world had changed. I turned to Jessica, my jaw clenched. Get back in the car. She raised an eyebrow, her expression almost amused. What, so you can give me another lecture? Spare me, Daniel. Jessica, I said, my voice low but filled with warning. Get in the car. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a dramatic sigh, she walked past me and slid into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before getting back behind the wheel. My hands were shaking, my mind racing, but I couldn't fall apart, not now. Not with the girls watching. As I started the car, Emily's small, trembling voice came from the back seat. "Daddy, what's going on? Is Mommy okay?" I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, my chest tightening. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that the mother she adored was someone I didn't recognize anymore? "She's fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Everything's fine." It was a lie, but what else could I say? Emily nodded, sniffling as she leaned into Sarah for comfort. Sarah, the older of the two, looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she knew something was deeply wrong. The drive was suffocating. The air between Jessica and me was thick with unspoken words, the tension so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I couldn't, not with the girls in the back seat. Instead, I focused on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jessica, of course, seemed unbothered. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, as if the chaos from a few minutes ago had already been erased from her mind. "Unbelievable," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, not even looking up from her phone. I bit my tongue, refusing to engage. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of another argument, not here, not now. But her complete lack of remorse, her cold indifference, was driving me to the edge. The girls eventually fell asleep, their exhaustion from the day's events finally taking over. I envied them in that moment, their ability to escape, even if only temporarily. I couldn't escape. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the woman beside me was the villain who had orchestrated it. When we finally pulled into the driveway of our house, I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. This was supposed to be our safe haven, our sanctuary. Now it felt like a prison. Jessica opened her door and got out, not bothering to wait for me. She didn't even glance at the girls as she walked toward the house, her heels clicking against the pavement. I watched her go, my anger simmering just below the surface. After a few moments, I got out and gently woke the girls. "Come on, sweethearts," I said softly. "Let's get you inside." Emily rubbed her eyes, yawning as I unbuckled her seatbelt. Sarah climbed out on her own, holding her younger sister's hand as we made our way inside. I tucked them into bed, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself. When they were finally asleep, I stood in the hallway for a moment, gathering the courage to face Jessica. She was in the kitchen when I found her, pouring herself a glass of wine like nothing had happened. She didn't even look up when I entered. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She sighed dramatically, setting the glass down. "What now, Daniel? Haven't we had enough drama for one day? Don't you dare act like this is just another day," I snapped, my anger finally breaking free. "You lied to me. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. You cheated, Jessica. You brought a man with a gun into our lives, and you're sitting here like it's no big deal." She rolled her eyes, taking a sip of wine. "Oh, please. Matt's not dangerous. He's just dramatic. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Our daughters were in the car, Jessica. They were terrified. Do you even care about them? About what this has done to them?" "Of course I care," she said, her tone dismissive. "But they'll be fine. Kids are resilient." Her lack of accountability, her complete disregard for the damage she'd caused, was like gasoline on a fire. "How long, Jessica?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "How long have you been seeing him?" She shrugged, swirling the wine in her glass. Does it matter? It's not like we were happy anyway. Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of her response. Not happy? I said, my voice trembling. I loved you, Jessica. I gave you everything. And you threw it away like it meant nothing. She looked at me then, her eyes cold and unfeeling. Maybe you should have tried harder, Daniel. And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing there in the kitchen, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I stood in the kitchen long after Jessica had left, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. Her words echoed in my mind, maybe you should have tried harder. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white as I fought the urge to scream. Tried harder? Was that her justification for betraying me? For putting our daughters through hell? Eventually, I made my way to the living room, sinking onto the couch. The house felt eerily quiet, as though it was mourning the death of something vital. My mind raced with questions, each one cutting deeper than the last. How long had she been lying to me? Was Matt the only one? And how had I been so blind? I stared at the framed family photos on the wall, my stomach twisting. There we were, smiling, happy, perfect. A lie. All of it. My eyes landed on one photo in particular, Jessica and me on our wedding day. She looked radiant, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes full of promise. Or at least, I'd thought so. Now, I wasn't sure I'd ever really known her at all. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I grabbed it, hoping it was a message from someone, anyone, offering some kind of clarity. But it wasn't a text. It was a notification from our shared bank account. A large withdrawal. I frowned, clicking on the notification to see the details. Jessica had transferred $10,000 to an account I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen. Was she planning to leave? To take the money and run? My mind jumped to the girls upstairs, peacefully sleeping, unaware that their world might be about to implode. I stormed up the stairs, my heart pounding. Jessica was in our bedroom, lounging on the bed with her phone in hand. She looked up as I entered, her expression bored. What now? She asked, her tone dripping with irritation. What the hell is this? I demanded, holding up my phone to show her the transaction. Where's this money going, Jessica? She didn't even flinch. It's none of your business. None of my business? I repeated, my voice rising. That's our money, Jessica. Money for our family. You don't just get to siphon it off without an explanation. She set her phone down, rolling her eyes. Relax, Daniel. It's for a rental. I need space. I stared at her, incredulous. Space? From what? From me? From your family? Don't be so dramatic, she said, waving a hand dismissively. I just need time to think. To figure out what I want. What you want? I snapped. You've already made it perfectly clear what you want, Jessica. And it's not this family. It's not me. It's Matt, or whoever else you've been seeing behind my back. She smirked, a cruel glint in her eyes. Oh, grow up, Daniel. Stop acting like a victim. You're not exactly a saint yourself. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I demanded, taking a step closer. She shrugged, picking her phone back up. It means maybe you should have been more attentive. Maybe if you'd spent less time at work and more time on me, I wouldn't have had to find someone else. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tell her she was full of crap. But the truth was, a part of me wondered if she was right. Had I been too focused on providing for the family and not enough on being present? Had I missed the warning signs because I was too busy trying to be a good husband and father? I shook my head, refusing to let her twist the blame. You don't get to rewrite history, Jessica. I was there. I loved you. I loved us. And you threw it all away. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Spare me the pity party, Daniel. You're not the only one who gets to feel hurt. I have needs too, you know. Needs? I repeated, my voice shaking. You mean like lying to me? Like betraying your family? Those kinds of needs? She stood up then, her expression hard. I'm not doing this with you, Daniel. I don't owe you anything. Not anymore. Her words were like a slap, but this time, they didn't just hurt. They lit a fire. I was done trying to reason with her, done trying to understand someone who clearly didn't care about anyone but herself. Fine, I said, my voice cold. You want space? You'll get it. But don't think for a second that you're taking the girls with you. If you want out, Jessica, then get out. But this is their home. And I'll be damned if I let you rip them away from it. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger crossing her face. You don't get to decide that, Daniel. I'm their mother. Then start acting like it, I shot back. Because right now, you're doing a hell of a job convincing me you don't deserve them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was so thick it felt like the walls might collapse under the weight of it. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my chest heaving, my mind racing. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just about Jessica and me anymore. It was about Emily and Sarah. And I was going to protect them, no matter what it took. The door slammed behind Jessica with a resounding crash, the echo reverberating through the house. I stood frozen in place, staring at the space she had just vacated. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. If she wanted to walk out, fine. But I wasn't going to let her trample over me or the lives of our daughters anymore. I headed to the girls' room to check on them. Sarah was awake, sitting up in bed, her wide eyes betraying her fear. Daddy, she whispered, her voice trembling, is everything okay? I knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I promise. Her lip quivered, but she nodded, trusting me as only a child could. Emily was still fast asleep, her tiny hand clutching her favorite stuffed animal. I kissed her forehead, wishing she could stay in that peaceful oblivion forever. After making sure the girls were settled, I went back downstairs. Jessica's absence left a strange, hollow feeling in the house, but for once, it felt like a relief rather than a loss. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Tyler. He picked up on the third ring. Dan? It's late. What's going on? He asked, his voice groggy but concerned. I need your help, I said, pacing the living room. Jessica's been cheating on me. Things have spiraled. I need someone to talk to. And maybe some advice. There was a pause on the other end before Tyler responded. Man, I'm so sorry. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Tyler showed up 20 minutes later, a six-pack of beer in one hand and a look of determination on his face. We sat in the living room, the weight of the situation settling between us. Tell me everything, he said, cracking open a beer and handing one to me. I laid it all out for him, the affair, Matt showing up with a gun, Jessica's cold indifference, and her recent withdrawal from our account. Tyler listened intently, his brow furrowed as I spoke. Jesus, Dan, he said when I finished. That's a lot. I don't even know where to start. Neither do I admitted, taking a swig of beer. I feel like my life's been flipped upside down. And the worst part is, I don't know what to do next. Tyler leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. First things first, you need to protect yourself. Legally. If Jessica's making moves like withdrawing money, there's a chance she's planning something bigger. You need to get ahead of it. You think I need a lawyer? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Absolutely, he said firmly. And you need to document everything. Every text, every email, every conversation. If this goes to court, whether it's for custody or divorce, you're going to need proof. The word divorce hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd been bracing for it. Part of me had been holding on to the hope that we could fix things, that Jessica might come to her senses. But after tonight, that hope felt more like a delusion. Yeah, I said quietly. You're right. Tyler gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. You'll get through this, Dan. It's going to be messy, but you're doing the right thing. For you and for the girls. We spent the next hour talking strategy. Tyler helped me draft a plan, call a lawyer first thing in the morning, freeze the joint account to prevent any more withdrawals, and start gathering evidence of Jessica's behavior. It was overwhelming, but having a plan gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. By the time Tyler left, it was nearly 3 a.m. I was exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, going through old messages and emails, searching for anything that might help my case. As I scrolled through months of correspondence, a pattern began to emerge: missed calls, late-night texts, vague excuses. The signs had been there all along, but I'd been too blind to see them. And then I found it. An email from Jessica to someone named Matt R. The subject line was innocuous, weekend plans, but the content made my stomach churn. Can't wait to see you this weekend. I'll make up an excuse to get away from Daniel. He's so predictable, he won't even notice I'm gone. My hands trembled as I read the words. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, like a knife twisting in my gut. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd mocked me. Dismissed me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in her way. I forwarded the email to myself, saving it as evidence. Then I closed the laptop and sat back, my mind racing. Jessica had underestimated me, but that was about to change. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. And I wasn't going to let her take my daughters away. The next morning, I woke up early, running on caffeine and adrenaline. I called the lawyer Tyler had recommended and explained my situation. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Angela, listened carefully before outlining my options. You need to act fast, she said. If your wife is moving money and potentially planning to leave, you need to secure custody of your daughters and protect your assets. Do you have evidence of her affair? I do, I said, thinking of the email. And I'll get more if I need to. Good, Angela said. We'll start with a temporary custody order. I'll draft the paperwork and file it today. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't alone. As I hung up the phone, I heard footsteps behind me. Jessica stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. What are you doing? She asked suspiciously. I met her gaze, my voice steady. Taking care of my family. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen. But this time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt resolute. The fight for my family had begun, and I wasn't going to back down. By the time Jessica walked out of the kitchen, I was already on my second cup of coffee, my mind racing with the decisions I'd made. Angela, my lawyer, had warned me this wouldn't be easy, but her confidence gave me strength. For the first time since the mess began, I felt like I was stepping out of survival mode and into action. But Jessica, true to form, wasn't going to let me take the reins without a fight. Later that morning, she reappeared in the living room as I was typing up a list of things I needed to prepare: bank statements, proof of her infidelity, custody schedules. Jessica stood there, arms crossed, her icy stare boring into me. I didn't look up immediately, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air. "Daniel," she said finally, her tone sharp. "We need to talk." I didn't stop typing. "About what?" She scoffed, throwing her hands up in frustration. "Don't play dumb. About this situation. Whatever you think you're doing, it's not going to work." I turned to face her, meeting her glare with one of my own. "What I'm doing is making sure our daughters have a stable life, Jessica. One that doesn't include your lies or whatever scheme you've cooked up with Matt." Her mouth twitched at his name, a flicker of anger flashing across her face. "Don't bring him into this. He's not the issue here." "Not the issue?" I barked, standing up. "He showed up with a gun, Jess. He's been sleeping with my wife. If he's not the issue, I don't know what is." She waved me off, as if I were some pesky fly she couldn't be bothered to swat. "This is why we can't have a civil conversation. You're so dramatic." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Civil? You want to talk about civil? Was it civil to cheat on me? To steal money from our account? To involve some unstable guy in our lives? If you want civil, you're about 20 decisions too late." Jessica's face darkened, her defenses rising. "Don't act like you're some saint, Daniel. You're not perfect." "Maybe not," I snapped. "But I didn't destroy our family, Jessica. That was all you." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she softened, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Look," she said, her voice quieter now. "I don't want this to get uglier than it already is. Let's figure this out like adults. For the girls." I crossed my arms, skeptical. "What exactly do you mean by figure this out?" "I mean, we don't need lawyers. We don't need to drag this through the courts. We can split things amicably. I'll take the girls during the week, you can have weekends. And we'll divide the assets fairly." I couldn't help but laugh again, this time shaking my head in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. You think I'm going to let you dictate terms after everything you've done? You think I'm going to hand over custody of our daughters to you, just like that?" She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "You really think a court's going to side with you? You work long hours. You've never been the one to handle their day-to-day lives. Face it, Daniel, you're not the parent they need." Her words were like a slap, but I refused to let her see the pain they caused. "Funny," I said coldly. "I wasn't the parent they needed when I was working my ass off to give them a good life. But now that it suits you, suddenly I'm not enough. You're unbelievable." Jessica shrugged, her smirk still in place. "I'm just being realistic." "No, you're being manipulative," I shot back. "But here's the thing, you've underestimated me. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for custody. And I'm going to make damn sure our girls stay with the parent who actually puts them first." Her smirk faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, her eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. You think you're fighting for them, but you're just making this harder for everyone." "Harder?" I said, my voice rising. "You want to talk about harder? You've already made it harder, Jess. For me, for the girls, for everyone. But I'm not backing down. Not this time." She didn't respond, just stood there staring at me like she was trying to decide her next move. Finally, she sighed and grabbed her purse. "Do whatever you want, Daniel. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, but this time, it didn't leave me feeling empty. It left me feeling resolute. That afternoon, I took Angela's advice and started documenting everything. I dug through emails, texts, bank statements, anything that painted a clear picture of Jessica's betrayal and irresponsibility. The email to Matt was just the tip of the iceberg. There were late-night charges to hotels, expensive gifts I'd never seen, and countless unexplained withdrawals. Every discovery was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had. By the time the girls woke up from their naps, I had a folder full of evidence and a plan in place. I spent the rest of the day focused on them, taking them to the park and making their favorite dinner. Every laugh, every smile reminded me why I was fighting so hard. They were my world, and I wasn't going to let Jessica take that away. As I tucked them in that night, Sarah looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, "Daddy, are you okay? You've been sad a lot lately." My heart broke at her words, but I forced a smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart. And I'm going to make sure you and Emily are okay too. That's a promise." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. I stood there for a moment, watching them, a sense of determination settling over me. Jessica thought she could control this narrative, but she was wrong. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for the truth, for justice, for the life my daughters deserved. And I was just getting started. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, but those 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Every day was a roller coaster of emotions, moments of steely determination followed by flashes of doubt and fear. But I stayed the course, leaning on Tyler and Angela, and most importantly, focusing on my daughters. They were my anchor through it all. Jessica had returned a few days after our confrontation, pretending like nothing had happened. She was icy and distant, but there was a new edge of nervousness to her. She knew I wasn't backing down, and that unnerved her. For once, I wasn't playing the passive, predictable husband she had so easily deceived. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. I spent a long moment in the girls' room, watching them sleep, reminding myself why I was doing this. Angela had warned me that custody battles could be brutal, but I was ready. I had prepared everything: evidence of Jessica's infidelity, proof of her erratic behavior, and documentation of my involvement as a father. Jessica, of course, showed up with Matt. Seeing him sitting there in the courtroom, smug and overconfident, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. But I kept my focus on Angela and the judge. Jessica had underestimated me before, and she was about to do it again. The hearing was a grueling process. Jessica's lawyer painted a picture of me as an absentee father, always working, uninvolved in the girls' lives. Jessica, in turn, played the victim, claiming she'd only sought comfort in Matt because I had been emotionally distant. It was a masterful performance, but Angela was ready for it. When it was my turn, I laid everything bare. I provided emails, bank statements, and testimonies that proved Jessica's betrayal and irresponsibility. Angela highlighted the volatile nature of Jessica's relationship with Matt, emphasizing the danger he posed to my daughters. But what truly tipped the scales was Sarah. When the judge asked if the children could provide input, I hesitated, not wanting to involve them more than necessary. But Sarah, sitting beside me in her little dress, spoke up on her own. "I want to stay with Daddy," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He makes us feel safe." Her words pierced through the courtroom like a bell. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, her composure cracked. I could see the fear in her eyes as she realized she was losing control. The ruling came the following week. The judge awarded me full custody, citing Jessica's instability and lack of accountability. She would have supervised visitation, but the girls would live with me full-time. It was a victory, but it felt bittersweet. I hadn't wanted it to come to this, I hadn't wanted my family to shatter, but I knew it was the right decision for my daughters. When I told Sarah and Emily, their faces lit up with relief. "Does that mean we'll always stay with you, Daddy?" Sarah asked. I knelt down and hugged her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. You're staying with me. Always." Jessica didn't take the ruling well. She lashed out in every way she could, angry texts, spiteful comments during visits, even trying to undermine me with the girls. But her efforts only backfired. Over time, her bitterness became less of a sting and more of a dull noise in the background. I stopped giving her the power to affect me. Matt, on the other hand, disappeared from her life not long after the hearing. Whether it was because of the court scrutiny or his own issues, I didn't care. He was gone, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The girls adapted quickly, their laughter filling the house once more. I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't easy being a single dad, but it was worth every challenge. One evening, as we were having dinner, Sarah looked up at me and said, "You seem happier now, Daddy." I smiled, ruffling her hair. "That's because I have you too," I said. "You're my everything." Looking back, I realized Jessica's betrayal had been a wake-up call, a painful, gut-wrenching wake-up call, but one I needed. It forced me to take control of my life, to stand up for myself and my daughters. It showed me the strength I didn't know I had and reminded me of the importance of the people who truly matter. To anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine, here's my advice: don't let the betrayal define you. Feel the pain, but don't live in it. Take action, protect what matters, and move forward. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, life isn't about the people who betray you. It's about the people who stand by you, the ones who make you laugh when all you want to do is cry, and the ones who remind you why it's worth fighting for. And for me, those people are Sarah and Emily. They're my world, my heart, and my second chance. And I won't let anyone take that away from me again.